Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1: The Disappearance at Dalloway Hall. The countryside of Kent lay golden under the slanting rays of the late October sun as the little grey motorcar wound its way along the narrow road leading to Dalloway Hall. The leaves were turning copper, crimson, and ochre, and a faint chill rode the afternoon air, carrying with it the earthy fragrance of rain-soaked soil and distant wood smoke. Inside the car sat two men, so utterly different in manner and appearance that they might have belonged to different worlds. At the wheel was Captain Arthur Hastings, tall, fair, and soldierly, his face tanned by many an English summer and his eyes bright with good humour. Beside him sat Monsieur Hercule Poirot, the world-renowned Belgian detective, small, precise, and immaculately attired in a dark suit, his shoes gleaming, his moustache waxed to perfection. His gloved hands rested neatly on his lap, and his gaze wandered thoughtfully over the rolling landscape. "Ah, Hastings," he murmured, in that soft, musical accent of his, "how peaceful it all is, the calm of your English countryside. One could almost forget that crimes exist in such a setting." Hastings laughed. "You'll find no crimes here, old fellow. Lady Dalloway's parties are known for music and good company, not for mischief." "Perhaps," said Poirot, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet, where there are human hearts, there is always the possibility of drama. The passions, they do not respect even the beauty of nature." Hastings shook his head, smiling. "You and your psychology. I tell you, Poirot, you're far too suspicious for a country weekend." Poirot only smiled enigmatically, and in 10 minutes more, they turned through tall iron gates and came in sight of Dalloway Hall. It was a grand house, a long, honey-coloured facade of Georgian elegance, draped with ivy and overlooking a great expanse of lawn that sloped gently toward the river. Its many windows gleamed in the waning sunlight, and the smoke that rose from its chimneys promised warmth and hospitality. As the car drew up to the entrance, the massive oak doors swung open, and Lady Beatrice Dalloway herself appeared to greet them. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, tall and stately, with silvered hair arranged in soft waves. Her manner was gracious, but her eyes, grey and thoughtful, suggested both intelligence and reserve. "Captain Hastings, how delightful to see you again. And this must be Monsieur Poirot. I am honoured to have you under my roof." "The honour, madam," said Poirot with a slight bow, "is entirely mine. Your house, it is of a most admirable symmetry. The lines, they please the eye." Lady Dalloway smiled. "You have an artist's eye, I see. Come, the others are gathering for tea." They followed her into a hall panelled in dark oak and hung with ancestral portraits. The air was scented faintly with lavender and wood polish. Poirot's keen gaze took in everything: the gleam of the parquet floor, the slight tilt of one picture frame, the faint traces of mud near the umbrella stand. Nothing escaped his notice. In the drawing-room, a fire crackled cheerfully, and a group of guests sat in comfortable conversation. Among them were several figures who would soon prove significant to the events that followed. There was Simon Trent, the pianist, a thin man with restless hands and intense eyes, who stood near the piano with the air of a performer never quite off stage. His expression was genial, but beneath it flickered something taut, an undercurrent of tension. Beside the window stood Eleanor March, Lady Dalloway's niece, a young woman of 25, graceful and quietly lovely, with chestnut hair and a thoughtful expression. Her laughter, when it came, was quick and genuine, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Poirot did not fail to note. And in a corner, half in shadow, was Ilya Orloff, the celebrated violinist from Russia, tall, dark, and striking, with a pale face and piercing eyes that seemed to see everything and trust no one. His long fingers played absently with a glass of sherry as he listened to the conversation, saying little. "Orloff," Lady Dalloway called warmly. "May I present Monsieur Poirot, the famous detective, and Captain Hastings? They are to join us for the concert tomorrow evening." Orloff inclined his head slightly. "Monsieur Poirot," he said in a low, musical voice, "I have heard of you, even in Petrograd. You are said to see the truth where others see only shadows." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, but the truth, Monsieur Orloff, it is often hidden in the shadow. One must look with patience." Orloff smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Patience is a virtue I have learned too well." Tea was served, conversation flowed, and Hastings, for his part, found himself delighted by the easy charm of the company. Yet, beneath the surface gaiety, Poirot sensed something else, a current of unease, an invisible thread of tension binding the room. When Lady Dalloway announced that Orloff would perform a short piece that evening as a preview of the concert, the guests eagerly agreed. As dusk settled, candles were lit, and the violinist took his place before the fire. The moment he began to play, the room fell utterly silent. The music was unlike anything Hastings had ever heard, wild, mournful, and hauntingly beautiful. It seemed to rise and fall like a voice crying across frozen steppes, full of longing and sorrow. When at last the final note quivered into silence, a breath seemed to pass through the room, something unspoken, but felt by all. Lady Dalloway's eyes glistened with tears. "Magnificent," she whispered. "Ilya, you have the soul of a poet." But Orloff merely bowed and turned away, his face unreadable. That night, after supper, the household retired early in preparation for the grand concert to be held the following evening. Hastings slept soundly in his comfortable guest room. Poirot, ever fastidious, arranged his clothes neatly and spent several minutes adjusting his moustache before bed. It was a peaceful night, until morning. At dawn, the housemaid Clara, bringing tea to Orloff's room, found the door ajar. The bed was untouched, the sheets smooth. A chair lay overturned near the writing desk, and on the floor beside it, Orloff's violin case, open, empty. "Madam! Madam!" the maid cried, running down the hall. "Mr. Orloff, he is gone!" Within minutes, the household was in uproar. Lady Dalloway, pale but composed, sent word to the local constable. The guests gathered in the corridor, whispering anxiously. Simon Trent looked stricken. Eleanor March stood by the window, her face white as marble. Poirot and Hastings, having dressed hastily, entered the room. Poirot took one glance around, then knelt to examine the carpet. "The case is open," said Hastings. "Perhaps he left early for a walk." Poirot shook his head. No, my friend. Look, the chair overturned, the faint smear of mud by the window, and do you detect the faint scent in the air?" Hastings sniffed. "Perfume?" "OUI. Jasmine. It lingers, delicate, but distinctive." Poirot straightened, his eyes sharp. "Monsieur Orloff has not gone for a walk. Something altogether less innocent has occurred." He looked around the silent room, at the open window, the disturbed papers, and the empty violin case. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Lady Dalloway's house will not be so peaceful as you thought, Hastings. I fear we have a disappearance, and possibly a tragedy, on our hands." Chapter 2: A House of Secrets. The morning after Ilya Orloff's disappearance dawned grey and uneasy. A pale mist clung to the lawns of Dalloway Hall, softening the outline of the river and the copper beech trees that stood sentinel beyond the drive. Inside, however, the mood was anything but tranquil. Servants whispered in corners, trays rattled nervously, and the guests moved about the breakfast table like uneasy actors awaiting their cue. Poirot entered the dining room with his usual composure, his appearance as immaculate as if he had stepped from the pages of a fashion plate. He greeted Lady Dalloway with a courteous bow. Madam, I regret deeply that your house, so full of grace and beauty, should awaken today under a cloud of mystery. Lady Dalloway's lips tightened. I can hardly credit it, Monsieur Poirot. Ilya was, well, he was temperamental, yes, but I cannot imagine him simply vanishing into the night. Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. You did not hear him leave? No sound, no footsteps. None. His room is at the far end of the east corridor. Had he gone by the main stair, someone would have seen him. And yet, said Poirot softly, he is gone. Captain Hastings, seated beside him, looked uneasy. You think something's wrong, Poirot? Perhaps he simply took fright or, well, some quarrel we know nothing about. Poirot sipped his coffee. Always the simple explanation first, Hastings. But already I sense dissonance, the small notes that do not fit the melody. At that moment, Simon Trent, the pianist, entered. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. Terrible business, he said, dropping heavily into a chair. I barely slept a wink. Poor Orloff, he was nervous last night. On edge. Lady Dalloway's gaze sharpened. Nervous? You mean frightened? Trent hesitated. Perhaps. We'd been rehearsing earlier, and he seemed distracted. Kept glancing toward the window, as though expecting someone. Poirot turned to him at once. You were the last to see him, perhaps. Possibly, said Trent. When we finished, around 10, he said he would go for a walk in the gardens to clear his head. I thought nothing of it. A walk, repeated Poirot. In the dark and chill? An odd choice for a man preparing for his concert. Orloff was a strange fellow, Trent muttered. Genius often is. Lady Dalloway pressed her napkin to her lips, her composure trembling. I shall have the ground searched at once. Rudge will see to it. She rang for the butler, and presently Mr. Rudge appeared, a heavy-set man with a ruddy face and the cautious bearing of one who listens more than he speaks. Yes, lady. Search the gardens, the stables, the river bank. Ask the gardeners if anyone saw Mr. Orloff leave the house last night. Rudge nodded and withdrew silently. Poirot's sharp eyes followed him. A capable man, he remarked. But he walks with the stiffness of one who carries secrets in his spine. Hastings gave a half-laugh. Good heavens, Poirot, you're seeing mysteries in everyone this morning. Mais ouï, Hastings. It is my nature. By mid-morning, the household was in full commotion. The servants searched the grounds in small groups. Japp, the Scotland Yard inspector who had been summoned from London, arrived shortly before noon, bringing with him the brisk air of officialdom. Well, well, Poirot, he exclaimed, shaking the detective's hand. What have we here, eh? A disappearing fiddler? Sounds like a runaway case to me. Poirot smiled faintly. Possibly. But let us not jump to conclusions, my dear Japp. The facts, they must be examined with the care one gives to a delicate souffle, lest it collapse. Japp snorted. You and your metaphors. All right then, what do we actually know? Poirot began pacing slowly across the drawing room. We know that Monsieur Orloff was last seen alive at 10 o'clock last night by Mr. Trent. We know that his bed was not slept in, that his violin is missing, and that there were signs of disturbance, a chair overturned, a trace of mud near the window, and the faint scent of jasmine perfume. Perfume? Japp raised an eyebrow. A woman, then? Perhaps, said Poirot. Or perhaps a woman's presence, not necessarily her guilt. Japp scribbled in his notebook. And this perfume, you're certain? Poirot nodded. My little grey cells are never mistaken in such delicate matters. Jasmine, faint but distinct. Right. I'll question the women in the house, then. Non, cried Poirot. To question at once, that is to make them defensive. Let us observe first. People reveal far more by what they do not say. Japp grunted, unconvinced, but agreed to wait. After luncheon, Poirot and Hastings took a slow tour of the estate. The autumn air had sharpened, and the mist hung low over the meadows. The detective paused often, by the terrace, at the boat-house, near the conservatory, noting things that Hastings, with his soldier's practicality, thought irrelevant. "Do you see, Hastings," Poirot murmured, "the footprints in the soft soil by the balustrade? Two sets, one deep and uneven, the other light. They tell a story. Of someone walking with another person." "Precisely. And notice the direction, toward the path leading to the east wing, not away from it." They moved further down, and Poirot crouched beside the gravel drive, plucking something from the ground, a small scrap of white fabric. "Handkerchief?" Hastings asked. "Part of one, yes." "Torn?" Poirot examined it closely. "Fine linen, not the sort a working man would carry. A woman's handkerchief, embroidered with the letter E. E for Eleanor." Hastings ventured. Poirot smiled approvingly. The deductive instinct of a true assistant. "But we do not assume. We verify." As they walked back toward the house, a figure appeared ahead, Eleanor March, in a grey walking cloak, her face pale against the autumn light. She started slightly on seeing them. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "have you found anything?" "Perhaps, mademoiselle." "You were acquainted with Monsieur Orloff, yes?" Her eyes flickered. "Yes. I admired his music. We spoke often. He was lonely, I think." "Lonely and troubled?" Poirot asked gently. She hesitated. "Yes." He spoke sometimes of the past. Of people who had wronged his family. I did not understand. Poirot inclined his head. "Did he mention anyone by name?" "No," she said quickly. "Only that he sought, what was his word, redemption." Poirot thanked her gravely. As she walked away, he turned to Hastings. "You see, my friend, already the melody becomes more complex. A man haunted by his past, a lady who pities him, a hostess who fears scandal, and somewhere, the faint scent of jasmine." By late afternoon, Mr. Rudge returned from his search. "No sign of Mr. Orloff, lady," he reported grimly. "But the gardeners say they heard a motorcar leave the grounds around midnight, not through the main gate, through the back service road." Lady Dalloway frowned. No guests were expected, and none departed. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A secret visitor, then. Or a secret departure. He paced slowly before the fire, his fingers steepled. Consider, Hastings, a foreign musician with enemies in his past. A late-night visitor arriving by the service road. A chair overturned, and a perfume that speaks of intimacy. What picture forms? Hastings thought for a moment. It sounds like he eloped, or was abducted. Possibly, said Poirot, though one must never underestimate the power of guilt. A man may vanish for love, yes, but also to escape the shadow of his own conscience. As evening fell, the household gathered once more, subdued and anxious. Japp, impatient with the lack of progress, proposed sending men to search the nearby woods. Poirot, however, lingered in the music room, studying the violinist's empty chair. He ran a finger over the polished surface, then looked toward the French doors that opened onto the terrace. His gaze fixed on the faint muddy smear beside the rug. "Tell me, Hastings," he said quietly, "what do you make of this?" "Someone came in through the garden." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, but not to enter. To leave." And the mud, it is from the river bank, not the flower beds. I think, Hastings, that Monsieur Orloff did not walk away from Dalloway Hall entirely of his own accord. He straightened, eyes glinting beneath his arched brows. Before this is over, my friend, we shall find that every guest beneath this roof has something to conceal, for this, indeed, is a house of secrets. Chapter 3, The Letter and the Locket. The following morning dawned cold and bright. A thin frost glazed the lawns of Dalloway Hall, glittering beneath a pale sun that seemed too weak to dispel the chill that had settled upon the house. Inside, the mood remained somber. The grand concert planned for the evening was, of course, cancelled, the piano stood closed, the chairs remained stacked in corners, and Lady Dalloway moved about like a woman in mourning, graceful, dignified, but burdened by anxiety. Poirot, by contrast, was at his most composed. He sat in the library after breakfast, sipping chocolate from a delicate china cup, his small, neat figure wrapped in serenity. Hastings, who was pacing restlessly near the hearth, found this composure exasperating. "I can't see how you can be so calm, Poirot. The man's been missing 2 days now, and we're no closer to knowing what happened." Poirot set down his cup. "Ah, mon ami, but calm is essential to the working of the little grey cells. Agitation, it clouds the reason. Already, the facts begin to align themselves in my mind like the notes upon a stave." "Facts," repeated Hastings incredulously. "We've nothing but guesses, perfume, footprints, and a broken chair. Justament. And it is in these trifles that the truth reveals itself. The large facts, they are too obvious, they mislead. It is the small detail that sings the true note." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Come, let us see what melody Dalloway Hall plays for us today." They began their morning in Orloff's room, which had been left undisturbed at Poirot's request. The detective moved slowly about, his every gesture precise, his gaze darting from one object to the next. "Observe, Hastings," he said, bending over the writing desk. "The ink on this pen, it is dry. He wrote something last night, but the nib has not been cleaned. A man of habit, Monsieur Orloff would not leave his tools in disorder." Hastings leaned over his shoulder. "A letter, perhaps?" Poirot nodded. "Perhaps indeed. Let us look." In the top drawer lay several papers, musical notations, receipts, and a half-written note in French. Poirot examined it closely, his eyes narrowing. The handwriting was bold but hurried, as though written under strain. "Mon cher frère," Poirot read aloud. "At last I come to the place where the truth must be spoken. The shame of our name will not die in silence. Tomorrow, all shall be known, and perhaps you will forgive me for—" He broke off. The letter ended abruptly, the final line smudged. "Well," said Hastings, "that sounds ominous enough. He meant to reveal something, but what?" Poirot folded the paper carefully. "We shall find out. The mention of shame, it is of significance. It suggests not crime, but dishonor, something moral, personal. Say interessant." He stood by the window, gazing out across the frost-silvered garden. "The truth must be spoken," he murmured. But perhaps someone feared that truth. A knock came at the door. It was Clara, the maid who had discovered the disappearance. She carried a small bundle wrapped in a handkerchief. "Beg pardon, sir," she said nervously, glancing between Poirot and Hastings. "I didn't like to say before, but when I was dusting the drawing room this morning, I found this, under the edge of the carpet, near the fireplace." Poirot took the bundle with interest and unwrapped it. Inside lay a small silver locket, oval and old-fashioned, its surface engraved with delicate vines. "Ah!" Poirot exclaimed softly. "And within?" He pressed the clasp and the locket opened with a faint click. Inside was a miniature portrait, the face of a young woman, dark-haired, beautiful, with an expression both gentle and sorrowful. On the opposite side was engraved a single word, Beatrice. Lady Dalloway's Christian name. Hastings gave a low whistle. Good heavens! Her locket? Clara shook her head. I don't know, sir. I showed it to Mrs. Gray in the still room. She said she'd never seen it before. But the name, well, it seemed strange. Poirot dismissed her with a kind smile. You have done most well, mademoiselle. You may go. When she had gone, he stood silent for a long moment, turning the locket in his fingers. A portrait, a name, and the scent of jasmine, which I have smelt before in Orloff's room. You see how the pattern begins to take form, Hastings. You think Lady Dalloway was involved? I think, said Poirot carefully, that Lady Dalloway has a past she prefers to remain in shadow. Whether that past connects to our missing violinist, we shall soon discover. They found Lady Dalloway in the morning room, seated by the fire with a book she was not reading. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed it upon their approach. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I fear there is still no news. None, madam. But perhaps we may cast a little light upon an old shadow. Her eyes flickered. I beg your pardon. Poirot placed the locket gently on the table before her. This was found in the drawing room. It bears your name. For a moment, she did not move. Her gaze rested upon the silver locket as though it were a ghost from another life. Then, in a low voice, she said, I have not seen that in 20 years. You recognize it? Yes. It was a gift from my late husband, before the war. It disappeared shortly after his death. Poirot's tone remained soft. And the portrait? She hesitated. That is me, or rather, was. I was younger then. Hastings exchanged a glance with Poirot. You say it vanished 20 years ago? Yes. Around the time we lost a member of our household. A musician, a protégé of my husband's. A Russian, I believe. His name was. She faltered. Anton Orloff, Poirot finished quietly. Her face drained of colour. You know. Poirot bowed his head. It was not difficult to guess. Ilya Orloff bears the same name, does he not? Perhaps a son. Lady Dalloway's composure broke. She pressed a hand to her eyes. My husband admired Anton. He had talent, grace, everything. But there was trouble, rumors, accusations during the war. My husband denounced him to the authorities. They said he was a spy. I begged him not to, but... She stopped, trembling. Poirot waited patiently. He was deported. We later heard he had died in prison. I did not know he had a child. Poirot's voice was grave. And yet that child came here, under your roof. Do you wonder, madam, that he vanished? She looked up, her expression one of mingled fear and pity. Ilya knew? He never spoke of it. He knew, Poirot said gently. In the letter he wrote to his brother, he spoke of truth and forgiveness. He came not for revenge, perhaps, but for acknowledgement. To prove his father innocent. There was silence. The fire crackled softly in the grate. At length, Lady Dalloway whispered, You think someone silenced him? Poirot looked toward the window, where frost still traced the panes. I think, madam, that a truth long buried may drive men, and women, to desperate acts. As they left the room, Hastings broke the silence. So Orloff was Anton's son all along. That explains his strange manner, his talk of justice. Poirot nodded. Yes. The sins of the fathers, Hastings. They cast long shadows. He stopped suddenly in the corridor, his gaze fixed upon something half hidden behind a tapestry, a faint scuff mark on the wooden floor. Footsteps, he murmured. Two, one small, one large. The smaller turns toward the east wing. The larger, back to the garden. They cross here. You think this was the path Orloff took? Perhaps. But who met him here? Lady Dalloway's confession raises one question more. If she did not know of his parentage, someone else did. Someone who feared what he might reveal. He straightened, his eyes bright with certainty. The truth, Hastings, is beginning to emerge from its hiding place. We have the letter that was not sent, the locket that was lost, and a secret that binds the living to the dead. Soon, very soon, the harmony of this house will break, and we shall hear the true note of the crime. Chapter 4: The Whispering Gallery. The wind had changed by the next morning. A cold gust swept across the grounds of Dalloway Hall, bending the trees and scattering leaves in copper spirals across the gravel drive. Inside the great house, fires burned in every hearth, yet a strange chill seemed to linger, a tension that no warmth could dispel. Servants went about their duties with anxious faces, and the guests, restless and subdued, spoke in hushed tones. Poirot, however, appeared perfectly unruffled. After breakfast, he announced that he wished to make a small but most instructive promenade about the upper floors. Hastings followed dutifully, notebook in hand. Another inspection, Poirot? I dare say you've already examined every inch of this house twice over. Ah, but twice, my dear Hastings, is not enough when one is listening, not merely looking, Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling. Yesterday we sought the visible, today we seek the invisible. The invisible? Hastings echoed, puzzled. Sound, said Poirot simply. That which passes through walls, that whispers behind doors. The things people say when they think they are unheard, those are the clues most valuable. They climbed the staircase to the second floor, where a long corridor curved into the east wing. Above them, a domed ceiling rose high, adorned with faded frescoes of angels and clouds. Lady Dalloway had told them that this upper passage was known locally as the Whispering Gallery. It was built in the 18th century, she had said the night before. The acoustics are quite extraordinary. Stand at one end and speak in a whisper, it can be heard perfectly at the other. Now, as Poirot stepped into the gallery, he paused, listening. The air here was oddly still, yet faintly resonant, as though the house itself breathed around them. You hear it, Hastings? He asked softly. The echo, delicate, lingering. This is a place where words may travel farther than intended. Hastings grinned. If you mean secrets, Poirot, I doubt there are any left. Japp's men have been all over the place. Poirot raised a finger. You are mistaken, mon ami. When men search, they disturb. But when the house is quiet, the truth sometimes whispers. He moved slowly along the curved wall, stopping now and then to press his ear against the plaster. Hastings watched him with curiosity. Suddenly Poirot held up a hand. Sure. A faint murmur drifted through the air, two voices, distant but distinct, though the words were unclear. Hastings strained to listen. The sound seemed to come from the far end of the gallery, beyond a narrow arched door. Without a word, Poirot began to walk toward it. They entered a small circular chamber lit only by a high window. It was empty save for a wooden stool, a few scattered sheets of music, and a violin bow resting upon the floor. A faint draught stirred the papers. Poirot knelt, examining the bow. This, he murmured, is of good quality, horsehair, finely strung. It belongs to Monsieur Orloff. You think he played here? Asked Hastings. Poirot's eyes travelled to the walls. Perhaps. The acoustics would delight a musician, the sound would swell like the voice of an angel. But look closer, Hastings, what else do you see? Hastings frowned, scanning the floor. There's dust, except here, where it's been disturbed. Precisely, said Poirot. And here, a candle stub burned down to the wick. Someone was here late at night. He rose, turning toward the narrow window. It overlooks the garden path leading to the river, the same path from which our footprints began. The pieces, Hastings, they begin to connect. Before Hastings could reply, the door opened abruptly. Simon Trent, the pianist, stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. "Oh. I didn't know anyone was here," he stammered. I sometimes come up here to practice. The acoustics are, well, you can hear every note echo." "Indeed," Poirot said smoothly. "And last night, perhaps, you came for such practice." Trent hesitated. "Last night?" "No, of course not." "Why should I?" Poirot's gaze rested on him quietly. "Why indeed? And yet you seem disturbed, monsieur." Trent ran a hand through his hair. "It's this whole business. I swear, since Orloff vanished, I can't think straight. Sometimes I imagine I hear him, the violin, playing in the dark." Poirot studied him closely. "And perhaps, monsieur, your imagination is not so deceived." Trent looked startled. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," Poirot said mildly. "Merely that sound plays tricks in this gallery. What one hears may not be where one thinks it comes from." Trent gave a nervous laugh. "Well, you're right about that. The place gives me the creeps." He turned to go, then paused. "You know, Orloff said something strange to me the day before he disappeared." Poirot's interest sharpened. "Ah? And what was that?" "He said, 'Music is confession.' I didn't know what he meant then. Perhaps now I do." Trent left hurriedly. Poirot watched him depart, his brow furrowed in thought. "Music is confession," he repeated softly. A curious phrase. To a musician, perhaps it means truth expressed in sound. But to Orloff, it may have meant something far deeper. As they descended the stairs, they met Inspector Japp, striding toward them, his notebook in hand. "Ah, Poirot! I was just coming to find you. We've got something new. One of the maids swears she saw a light in the east wing at about 1 in the morning 2 nights ago." "Indeed," said Poirot. "And she is certain of the time. She says she woke to the sound of footsteps overhead. Looked out her window and saw a light moving, not steady, more like a lantern." "Bon," murmured Poirot. "It fits very well." Japp frowned. "Fits what?" "The melody of the house," said Poirot. "Every note is falling into place." He led them back to the small circular chamber. There, he pointed to the scuffed floor, the candle stub, and the window. Someone was here that night, perhaps more than one person. The sound the maid heard was no ghost, but a meeting. Monsieur Orloff, I think, was not alone. "You mean Trent," said Japp. "Or the niece, what's her name, Eleanor March?" "Possibly," Poirot replied. "Yet the candle, it is perfumed wax, faintly scented with jasmine. Does that not remind you of something, Hastings?" "The perfume," cried Hastings. "In Orloff's room." Poirot smiled faintly. "Exactly. The same fragrance. Therefore, the lady who met Orloff here wore jasmine, and we know of at least one who does." Japp raised an eyebrow. "Lady Dalloway." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Ah, my friend, you see the danger of haste. It may be she, or another who borrowed her perfume. We must not accuse until the symphony is complete." He looked once more around the chamber, thoughtful. Then his gaze fell upon the sheets of music scattered near the stool. Gently, he gathered them up. On the top page, written in a bold, slanting hand, were the words, Requiem for Anton. Hastings stared. Good Lord, Anton Orloff? His father. Poirot nodded gravely. So it seems. He composed this piece for the man wronged by Lady Dalloway's husband. A requiem, a memorial. But perhaps also a declaration. Japp exhaled sharply. So the boy came here to expose the old scandal, maybe blackmail her. Poirot's moustache twitched. You are too English, Japp, you think always in terms of blackmail and crime. There is also honor, pride, remorse. No, I think Orloff sought only to bring truth to light. He tapped the manuscript lightly. But someone, fearing that truth, struck a darker note. They stood in silence, the wind sighing faintly through the dome above. Poirot turned at last to the others, his expression serene but grave. This room, gentlemen, is the heart of Dalloway Hall, a place built to carry whispers. It has heard music, secrets, and lies. And soon, I think, it will echo with confession. He folded the score under his arm, his eyes distant. For now, we listen, he said softly. Always, we listen. Chapter 5, A Visit to the Village. The following morning broke under a sky of soft grey clouds, the kind that promised rain but held their tears. Dalloway Hall was unusually quiet. Breakfast had been subdued, Lady Dalloway seemed pale and distracted, Simon Trent scarcely spoke, and Eleanor March's eyes, reddened from weeping, betrayed a sleepless night. Only Poirot appeared in excellent spirits, his moustaches gleaming and his gait brisk as ever. Today, Hastings, he declared, as we stepped out into the crisp air, we make a little pilgrimage to the village. The village? I asked. You mean Dalloway Green? Just so. Every house, every heart within a few miles of this hall knows something, a fragment of truth, a whisper of gossip. The English countryside, mon ami, is like a fine tapestry. The design reveals itself only when one steps back. I smiled. And you think someone down there may have seen or heard something about Orloff? Poirot adjusted his gloves. Not think, Hastings, no. But they may not realize what they have seen. The road to Dalloway Green wound through meadows damp with dew and past low stone walls tufted with moss. The air smelled faintly of earth and autumn smoke. As we descended toward the cluster of cottages and shops that formed the village, the great house behind us seemed to withdraw into the mist like a secret too large for daylight. Our first stop was the post office, a tidy, ivy-covered building presided over by Mrs. Pritchard, a stout woman with a shrewd eye and an apron that looked perpetually dusted with flour. Poirot introduced himself with courtly politeness, and soon the lady, clearly flattered, began to chatter freely. Oh yes, sir, we get all the letters for the hall through here. Always have, since the old lord's time. Dr. Leela Krishnan's telegrams too, when she was visiting last summer. Oh, she was a pleasant lady, she was. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Madam, I am most interested in a certain telegram, one that may have been sent to or from Monsieur Anton Orloff. Mrs. Pritchard pursed her lips. Well, now, I can't go about handing over private messages, sir. That wouldn't be proper. But of course not. Poirot agreed with warmth. I would not dream of asking you to betray your duty. I merely inquire whether such a telegram was indeed received, for the purpose of time, not content. Mrs. Pritchard hesitated. Her eye softened a little. Well, since you put it like that, there was one, as it happens. Came in 3 days before he disappeared. Foreign-looking envelope, too. I recall because it gave me trouble to spell the name, Orloff, you said? Russian, isn't it? O-U-I, madam. And to whom was it addressed? Directly to him. Care of Dalloway Hall. Marked urgent. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And do you remember the place of origin? Oh, I do indeed. It was from Geneva. Geneva! I exclaimed. Good heavens, Poirot, that's where Orloff said he studied. Mrs. Pritchard nodded. That's right, sir. He looked a bit shaken when he opened it, I must say. Went out for a long walk afterward. Poirot thanked her profusely, leaving her smiling behind the counter. As we stepped out onto the cobbled street, I turned to him. So, someone from Geneva sent him an urgent message, just before he vanished. What do you make of that? Poirot twirled his walking stick thoughtfully. It suggests that the cause of his disappearance began before he came to Dalloway. A shadow followed him from abroad, perhaps. He stopped, frowning slightly. Or it may be he paused, tapping the stick lightly on the ground, that he expected that message, and what it contained set in motion the events we now investigate. Do you think it could have been blackmail? I suggested. None, Hastings. If there was blackmail, it was of the soul, not the purse. Our next call was at the village inn, the Fox and Fiddle, where a ruddy-faced landlord greeted us cheerfully. The interior smelled of oak and ale, a fire burned merrily in the grate. Morning, gentlemen. What'll it be? 2 cups of coffee, if you please, said Poirot. And perhaps a small question. You have many travellers passing through, yes? A fair few. Hikers mostly, and the occasional motorcar from town. Poirot leaned forward confidentially. And 3 nights ago, the night before the disappearance at Dalloway Hall, did anyone arrive, or leave, unusually late? The landlord rubbed his chin. Well now, there was a fellow came in that evening, foreign sort, with a limp. Had a glass of beer, didn't stay long. Left just after 8, said he was walking up toward the hall. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A limp, you say? And did he give a name? None that I recall. Paid in cash. Wore a dark coat, had the look of a man who'd been travelling a long way. Poirot exchanged a brief glance with me. And he went in the direction of the hall. That's right. Haven't seen him since. Poirot thanked the man gravely, then sat silent for several minutes after we left the inn. The clouds had thickened, a low drizzle began to fall. At last, the ghost has form, he murmured. A foreigner with a limp, possibly connected to Geneva, visiting the hall on the eve of the disappearance. He gave a small sigh of satisfaction. You see, Hastings, the melody becomes more complex, but also more harmonious. Before returning to Dalloway Hall, Poirot insisted upon visiting the small village church. The vicar, a kindly old man named Reverend Cole, received us warmly. His study was lined with dusty books and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. Ah, yes, said the Reverend when Poirot mentioned Anton Orloff. A fine musician, that young man. He played the organ here one Sunday afternoon, I remember it still. Such tenderness in his touch, such melancholy. He told me music was the only language left for the dead. Odd thing to say, don't you think? Perhaps not so odd, said Poirot gently. And did he mention anything else, perhaps his family? The vicar frowned, thinking. He spoke of his father, said the man had been betrayed by honourable men. I thought it a curious phrase, but I didn't press him. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Did he ever receive visitors here? One, I believe. A young woman. Came quietly, left before dusk. Could have been Lady Dalloway's niece, I saw her from the vestry window, but at a distance. Hastings and I exchanged glances. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. Merci, Monsieur le Vicaire. You have told us much. As we stepped outside, rain pattered gently on the graveyard stones. Poirot stood for a moment, gazing across the misty hills toward the silhouette of Dalloway Hall. "Hastings," he said softly, "there are two tragedies here, one old, one new. The first was buried beneath silence, the second tries to speak through music." I nodded. "You think they're connected, then?" "I am certain of it. The sins of the fathers, Hastings, they return, like echoes in that whispering gallery." He took out his pocket watch. "It is time we return. There is one person in that house who knows the whole symphony, and tonight she shall play her final note." When we reached Dalloway Hall once more, the sky had darkened into evening. Poirot paused on the steps, glancing up at the great arched windows where faint light flickered. Inside, somewhere above, a single violin note trembled through the air, soft, lingering, and heartbreakingly sweet. Poirot's expression grew solemn. "You hear it, Hastings," he murmured. "The voice of the dead. It calls for justice." And with that, he mounted the stairs and disappeared into the shadows of the hall. Chapter 6: The Midnight Sonata. That night, the storm broke. Rain lashed against the tall windows of Dalloway Hall, and the wind howled through the chimneys with a low, mournful sound, as if echoing the unease that had settled over the house. By 10 o'clock, most of the guests had retired. Only Poirot and I remained in the drawing-room, where the fire burned low and the shadows danced upon the walls. Poirot sat in an armchair, fingertips pressed together, eyes closed in thought. The clock on the mantel ticked solemnly, each second loud in the silence. "You are restless, Hastings," he said without opening his eyes. "Well, yes," I admitted. "That strange music this afternoon, the one note hanging in the air, it's got under my skin. I keep wondering if Orloff's ghost hasn't come back to finish his tune." Poirot's lips curved faintly. "Ghosts, mon ami, exist only in the guilty conscience. But the music, that was no apparition. It was deliberate. Deliberate. Mise OUI. It was a signal." I frowned. "A signal? But to whom?" Poirot opened his eyes at last, sharp and bright as glass. "To me, Hastings. The murderer speaks, though not in words." Before I could question further, a low sound drifted through the air, faint at first, then unmistakable. A violin. The melody rose and fell, hesitant, haunting. It came, I thought, from somewhere above us, perhaps the east wing. Poirot stood instantly. "You hear it again?" "Bon. It is time." "Time for what?" "For the final movement to begin." He motioned for me to follow. We took candles from the sideboard and made our way silently up the grand staircase. The music continued, slow and sorrowful, weaving through the corridors like mist. It drew us toward the whispering gallery, that eerie curved corridor beneath the dome. As we approached, the sound grew clearer. It was no random playing now, it was a sonata, precise and beautiful, yet unbearably sad. The same melody Orloff had rehearsed the evening before his disappearance. Poirot raised his candle, the flame flickering across the gilded cornices. "Do not speak, Hastings," he whispered. "Let us listen." We followed the sound to the circular chamber at the end of the gallery, the same where we had found the candle stub and music sheets. The door was half open. A pale glow spilled from within. Inside stood Eleanor March. She was dressed in a white nightgown, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. The violin trembled in her hands as she played, her eyes closed, tears glistening on her cheeks. The sight was almost spectral. Poirot stepped forward softly. "Mademoiselle." The bow froze mid-air. The violin dropped slightly, and she turned, startled. "Monsieur Poirot." I didn't know anyone was awake." "Few can sleep," Poirot said gently, "when music such as this fills the air. You play very beautifully." She gave a small, broken laugh. It was his music. Anton's. I found the notes in my room. I thought, if I played it, perhaps he would answer. Poirot finished softly. Her lip trembled. Yes. Poirot regarded her kindly but keenly. Tell me, mademoiselle. Why did you come here tonight, to this room, and not another? She hesitated. Because this is where he played last. The air still carries his sound. I can almost feel him here. Indeed, said Poirot quietly. And perhaps you are not wrong. He set down the candle and knelt by the wall, running his fingers along the paneling. Hastings, do you recall what I said? That sound travels curiously here. Yes, like a whisper through stone. Exactly. He pressed a carved panel. There was a faint click. A section of the wall shifted inward with a sigh of air. Eleanor gasped. Behind the panel lay a narrow stair descending into darkness. A secret passage, I whispered. Good Lord. Poirot nodded. Every English manor has one, n'est-ce pas? A relic of old fears, or old sins. He picked up the candle and motioned us forward. The stair was steep and cold, spiraling downward through stone. After some 20 steps, we emerged into a small crypt-like chamber beneath the gallery. It smelled faintly of damp and candle wax. In one corner stood a wooden chair, a lantern, and a violin case. Eleanor cried out and ran to it. It's his! Poirot held up a hand. Do not touch, mademoiselle. He opened the case carefully. Inside, the violin rested intact, but beside it lay a folded sheet of paper. Poirot lifted it, unfolded it, and read silently. Then he looked up, his expression unreadable. It is a letter, he said softly. Addressed to Lady Dalloway. A letter? I exclaimed. From Orloff. OUI. Listen. He read aloud. Madam. You will not forgive me, but I cannot remain silent. The truth of my father's disgrace must be known. The music I shall play tomorrow night, the requiem, is not for him alone, but for your husband, whose honor was bought with his ruin. When the final note falls, you will understand what it cost to keep the Dalloway name unsullied. Anton Orloff. Eleanor sank to her knees. Then he meant to expose it all, and someone stopped him. Poirot's eyes glimmered. OUI, mademoiselle. But not by murder, at least, not yet. Not yet? I echoed. What do you mean? Poirot turned to the far wall. There, half hidden by shadows, was a heavy oak door. He pressed the latch, it creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in, and beyond, the darkness yawned like a tunnel. It leads, Poirot said, to the river path. The same one where the footprints began. Monsieur Orloff came here that night, waiting to perform his confession. He was not alone. Eleanor clutched the candle, her face pale. You think he met the killer here? Poirot shook his head slowly. Non, mademoiselle. I think he met the one he loved and trusted. Her eyes widened. You mean? But before she could finish, a noise above interrupted her, a dull thud, followed by the faint echo of footsteps retreating through the gallery. Poirot straightened instantly. Quickly! Someone listens! We hurried up the steps, emerging once more into the circular chamber. The room was empty, but the corridor beyond was not. A figure moved swiftly through the darkness, candlelight catching a flash of pale silk. Lady Dalloway. Stop! I called, but she vanished around the curve. Poirot did not pursue. Instead, he stood very still, his head bowed, listening. Then he spoke, almost to himself, so, the movement concludes as it began. The mother protects the son. The lie defends the honor. How English, how tragic. He turned to me. Come, Hastings. It is enough for tonight. Tomorrow, the curtain will rise, and the truth will take its bow. The storm eased by dawn, leaving the sky washed clean and cold. Dalloway Hall stood silent under a pale sun, its windows glistening with rain. Eleanor March had retired to her room, exhausted. Poirot and I lingered in the breakfast room. Jap was expected from London by midday. Poirot sipped his chocolate thoughtfully. You see now, Hastings, how music and memory intertwine. The Requiem, it was not merely art. It was justice, concealed in melody. And Lady Dalloway? I asked. Do you think she? Poirot raised a hand. Patience. The truth, like a fine symphony, must be heard in full before we applaud. He rose, placing his cup neatly on the saucer. The final act begins tonight. And then, La Verite will sing. Chapter 7, The Confession at Dalloway Hall. Morning light filtered through the long windows of Dalloway Hall, gilding the furniture with a cold, wintry sheen. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered, branches strewn across the lawn, puddles glittering like scattered glass. Inside, the house was unnervingly still, as if holding its breath before some inevitable revelation. Poirot was already awake when I joined him in the breakfast room. He was arranging his napkin with exaggerated care, every movement measured and calm. Good morning, Hastings. You have slept, I hope. Not much, I admitted. After last night's discovery, the letter, the hidden passage, I kept wondering what it all means. Poirot gave a faint smile. It means, mon ami, that the truth is very near. Only one piece of the puzzle remains, why Monsieur Orloff vanished instead of confronting his adversary as planned. Before I could reply, a soft voice spoke behind us. It was because of me. We turned. Lady Dalloway stood in the doorway, pale but composed. She wore a simple grey gown, her hands clasped before her. There was no pretense now, no aristocratic hauteur, only fatigue and sorrow. Please, she said quietly, I would speak to you both, before Inspector Japp arrives. Poirot inclined his head gravely. As you wish, madam. We followed her to the library, that grand, shadowed room lined with oak shelves and ancestral portraits. She closed the door behind us and faced the fire, though no flames burned there. I will tell you everything, she said. But you must promise, if Anton still lives, that he shall not suffer for what I did. Poirot's expression softened. Madam, I promise nothing until I know all. Begin at the beginning. She drew a slow breath. It began 20 years ago, long before you were born, Captain Hastings. My husband, Sir Gerald, was a proud man. He was also ambitious, desperately so. There was a deal, a speculation, that could have ruined him. A man named Ivan Orloff, Anton's father, discovered the falsified papers and threatened to expose them. Her voice faltered. I was the one who persuaded him not to. I pleaded with him, for the sake of Gerald's career, our family's name. He agreed, but he was dismissed, disgraced. He took his own life the following year. And you never spoke? Poirot asked softly. How could I? It would have destroyed everything. But his widow wrote to me, again and again. When she died, her son took up the cause. He wrote from Geneva, demanding that I acknowledge the truth. So the telegram came from his associates, Poirot murmured. An ultimatum. Yes, said Lady Dalloway. When Anton arrived, I begged him to let it rest. I offered him money, and not to buy silence, but mercy. He refused. He said his requiem would make the truth immortal. And you agreed to meet him that night, Poirot said. She looked startled. You knew. Poirot smiled faintly. Mise OUI. The jasmine candle betrayed you. You came to the Whispering Gallery, but what happened there, madam? Tears welled in her eyes. I meant only to plead again. He was so passionate, so certain. He said he would perform the piece the next day, dedicate it publicly to his father's memory. I lost my temper. I struck the candle, and it fell, the flame caught his coat sleeve. For a moment it seemed everything would burn. And then? Poirot prompted gently. He ran toward the window to throw it open, and I saw in his eyes something, pity. He said, Do not fear, madam. I will not destroy you. I shall leave tonight. Then he was gone. I thought it ended there. Her voice trembled. But when they told me he had vanished, I believed I had driven him to despair. Poirot regarded her steadily. And you told no one? How could I? She whispered. Who would believe that mercy could cause such harm? For a moment, there was silence. Then Poirot rose, hands clasped behind his back. Madam, you have told the truth, or most of it. But there is still something you do not know. He turned toward me. Hastings, the violin. Yes, the one in the hidden room. It was not placed there by chance, said Poirot. It was hidden. And only one person could have done so. Lady Dalloway's brow furrowed. Who? Your niece, Eleanor March. Eleanor, she gasped. That's impossible. Poirot's tone remained calm. Not impossible, inevitable. Mademoiselle March loved Anton Orloff. They corresponded secretly for months. She knew his purpose in coming here, and she aided him until she realized the truth of his father's story. He walked to the window, looking out across the misty lawn. When Orloff decided to leave, she met him on the river path. There was a struggle, not of violence, but of emotion. She implored him to stay, to let the past rest. He refused. And so she helped him vanish. Vanish? I repeated, incredulous. You mean he's alive? Poirot turned, eye shining. OUI, mon ami. Alive, though wounded, in spirit if not in flesh. Eleanor hid him. The crypt passage leads not only to the river, but to the gardener's cottage beyond the wood. He has been there ever since. Lady Dalloway sank into a chair, speechless. Eleanor, my own niece, hid him? But why? Poirot smiled faintly. Love, madam. Love is often more ingenious than reason. She wished to protect him, and you. She believed that if he reappeared after the truth was spoken, no one would be blamed but time itself. At that moment, the door burst open. Inspector Japp strode in, his coat dripping from the rain. Morning, Poirot. I came as quick as I could. There's talk in the village, some lad saw a light in the gardener's cottage last night. Poirot inclined his head serenely. Indeed, Japp? Then your timing, as always, is impeccable. I believe you will find Monsieur Orloff within, weak, but alive. Japp blinked. Alive? You don't say. Poirot smiled. I do say. Later that afternoon, they brought Orloff into the hall. He was pale, thinner than before, but his eyes burnt with quiet fire. Eleanor walked beside him, her hand trembling in his. Lady Dalloway rose as they entered. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Anton bowed slightly. Madam. I did not wish to return, but she convinced me. You must know, I never meant to harm you. Lady Dalloway's composure broke. She stepped forward and took his hand. No, Anton. It was I who wronged you, and your father. Forgive me. He bowed his head. He is at peace now. So should you be. The room was utterly still. Poirot watched them with quiet satisfaction, then turned to me. You see, Hastings, the confession we awaited was not of guilt, but of sorrow. Sometimes, to solve a mystery, one must heal the heart before the mind. That evening, the rain ceased, and a faint light returned to the horizon. The air in the hall seemed lighter, cleansed of its burden. Poirot stood at the window, gazing out toward the gardens where Japp's men had finished their work. Another case closed, Poirot? I asked. He shook his head gently. None, Hastings. Not closed, resolved. There is a difference. He smiled faintly. Truth, when at last it sings, should not accuse, but forgive. He looked toward the drawing room, where faint strains of a violin began once more, this time, not a requiem, but a gentle, hopeful melody. Listen, Poirot whispered. The final note of peace. Chapter 8, Poirot's last beau at Dalloway Hall. The drawing room of Dalloway Hall was filled with a heavy, almost sacred stillness. Outside, the last of the October light faded behind the willows, and the air smelled of damp leaves and faint wood smoke. Inside, a circle of expectant faces turned toward the small, perfectly composed figure of Hercule Poirot. He stood before the great fireplace, immaculate in his grey suit, moustaches gleaming like twin sabres of silver. His eyes, sharp, serene, and triumphant, moved from one person to another. Mesdames, Messrs, he began, his voice calm but carrying authority, we have come, as the English say, to the end of our song. The melody that began with a telegram in Geneva has reached its final chord. It is time to understand how it was composed. I sat beside Lady Dalloway, who looked pale but peaceful. Eleanor sat opposite, her hands clasped in her lap. Beside her stood Anton Orloff, fragile, but alive. Inspector Japp occupied the armchair nearest the fire, notebook in hand, ready to record whatever explosion of truth Poirot was about to unleash. Poirot raised one delicate hand. We shall begin, he said, with the facts that everyone believed to be true. Monsieur Anton Orloff came to Dalloway Hall at the invitation of Lady Dalloway, bringing with him a composition entitled Requiem for Silence. The day after his arrival, he vanished. His room was found empty, a candle overturned, a note unfinished. The world believed he had fled or met with misfortune. He paused, pacing a few steps. But it was not so simple. None. The note, the candle, the open window, they were part of a pattern. Each a fragment of a larger design. Japp frowned. A design? Looked to me like a runaway artist, Poirot. Ah, my dear Japp, said Poirot gently, always you think of feet running. I think of mine's hiding. He smiled faintly. Permit me to demonstrate. He turned toward Lady Dalloway. Madam, when you told me of your meeting with Monsieur Orloff in the Whispering Gallery, you omitted one small detail, the candle that fell. You said it caught his sleeve. Yet when I examined the burned mark upon the floor, I saw it was circular, as if something heavy, a candlestick, perhaps, had struck it deliberately. Lady Dalloway's eyes widened. I may have knocked it harder than I realized. Just so, said Poirot. In that moment of panic, you thought you had harmed him. But in truth, he was unharmed. He fled through the passageway, not from guilt, but to spare you from shame. He looked toward Eleanor. And you, Mademoiselle March, found him there, in that secret passage behind the library shelves. How? Because you knew it existed. You discovered it as a child, perhaps, playing in the old wing. Eleanor nodded slowly. Yes. I used to hide there during storms. Ah. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You see, Hastings? The past always leaves a key upon the table. He continued, Mademoiselle took Orloff to the gardener's cottage, tended him, and persuaded him to remain hidden until she could decide what to do. But the strain became too great. The missing violin, the villagers whispering, the guilt in her aunt's eyes, all weighed upon her. When she placed the violin in the crypt passage, it was not to conceal evidence, but to leave a sign, a confession for one who might understand. Lady Dalloway murmured, I thought it was meant for me. Poirot inclined his head. And so you see, madam, even guilt can be mistaken for love, and love for guilt. He turned then to Japp, who had been scribbling furiously. But there remains another question, my friend. Who sent the second telegram? Japp looked up sharply. Second telegram. Poirot smiled. Mise OUI. The first came from Geneva, an invitation to Dalloway Hall. The second arrived that morning, addressed to Monsieur Orloff, summoning him to London urgently. A clever forgery, intended to make it seem that he had left of his own will. He raised a finger. And who, I ask, could have sent such a telegram? He let the silence draw out, eyes moving slowly over each face. It was sent, he said softly, by Sir Gerald Dalloway. A gasp broke the hush. Lady Dalloway half rose from her chair, white with shock. Gerald? But that's impossible, he's been abroad these 2 months. Poirot nodded gravely. Indeed. But he was not abroad. He was in London, concealing his own shame. You see, madam, he too received a letter from Orloff before the young man arrived. He feared exposure and disgrace. So he arranged to make Orloff disappear. Disappear, repeated Japp grimly. You mean? Not murder, my friend. Blackmail by absence. Sir Gerald planned to hide Orloff, destroy his papers, and then feign ignorance. But Eleanor's intervention changed everything. When she smuggled Orloff out of the hall and into the cottage, Sir Gerald believed his plan had failed. He fled to London, hoping to avoid the consequences. Lady Dalloway's voice trembled. So all these years, all this suffering, it began with Gerald's deceit. Poirot bowed his head slightly. Yes, madam. A lie is a seed that grows in every direction. And yet, he looked up, eyes softening. It need not choke the garden if one has the courage to pull it out by the root. There was silence for a time. The fire crackled faintly, throwing orange light across the faces in the room. Then Eleanor rose, tears in her eyes. Will they arrest him, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot hesitated. No, mademoiselle. He has already surrendered himself to justice, though not the kind you mean. He left London 3 days ago, bound for Geneva. Inspector Japp received word this morning. He intends to make public confession of his dealings, and to restore the funds he misused long ago. Lady Dalloway covered her face, her voice breaking. He has saved us, at the cost of his own name. Poirot said gently, he has merely balanced the account, madam. It is not salvation, but symmetry. At last, Poirot turned toward Orloff, who had remained silent until now. And you, monsieur, what will you do? Orloff's voice was quiet but steady. I will finish my composition. But it shall not be a requiem. I will call it Elegy for Forgiveness. It will be performed once, here, and then never again. Poirot smiled faintly. Then your father's spirit will rest at last. He clasped his hands. You see, my friends, it was never a crime of greed or jealousy, but of conscience. A chain of guilt stretching across generations, broken only by truth. He glanced around the room. There were many clues, if one but looked closely, the ashes of the telegram, the mark of the candlestick, the footprints too light for a man's shoes, the scent of jasmine mingled with varnish. Each told a fragment of the tale. Yet it was the heart, not the evidence, that solved this mystery. Japp closed his notebook with a sigh. "You've done it again, Poirot. Every time I think I've seen the last of your tricks." "Not tricks, mon cher Japp," said Poirot, smiling. "Merely the exercise of the little grey cells." Later that evening, when the others had gone and the lamps burned low, Poirot and I stood by the window overlooking the moonlit lawns. The air was cool and still, and from the distant music room came the faint sound of a violin, soft, mournful, beautiful. Poirot listened, his expression thoughtful. "Do you hear, Hastings? That is not the music of sorrow. It is the music of release." I nodded. "You mean the mystery is truly over?" Poirot smiled. "Over? Perhaps. But every end, mon ami, is also a beginning. From silence, music is born again." He adjusted his tie with a small, satisfied gesture. "And so," he said softly, "the harmony is restored." The violin played on, its final note trembling like a sigh in the night, and Hercule Poirot, the great detective, stood very still, as if listening to the sound of truth itself.